and thank you for joining us for today's deep dive. We are thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, really glad you could tune in.
If you are the kind of person who is just, insanely curious, who loves to understand the hidden machinery behind everyday life, you are in exactly the right place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because today we are taking a fascinating journey into something you experience all the time, but you probably don't fully understand on a biological level.
Right. We are unpacking a pretty massive evidence-based nursing and health text. It's titled Dynamics of Human Stress and Adaptive Coping Strategies.
The heavy title.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But our mission for this deep dive is to look at the true biological and, well, the psychological machinery of stress.
Because we tend to throw the word stress around so casually, right?
Yeah.
Like complaining about traffic or a busy workday.
Constantly. I mean, I said I was stressed about finding parking this morning.
Exactly. But from a clinical and scientific perspective, it is this brilliantly orchestrated, incredibly taxing biological response.
It's not just a bad mood.
No, not at all. It involves your brain, your endocrine system, and your immune system constantly communicating, making these real-time trade-offs just to keep you alive.
To set the stage for you today, I want to pose a question.
Go for it.
We all experience stress. But do you know why packing your bags for a relaxing vacation can trigger the exact same biological alarm bells in your body as, say, committing a minor violation of the law?
It sounds wild when you phrase it like that.
It does. But we are going to answer that today. And just to set the scene for us, for those who appreciate the visual context, our expert is joining us today from a serene, subtly animated medical library backdrop.
I thought it was fitting.
It's the perfect anchor because we're building on decades of rigorous, peer-reviewed science here. We're dismantling preconceived notions and moving past just the psychology right down to the cellular level.
So where do we begin?
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the body's ultimate balancing act. We really need to look at Walter Cannon's 1930s concept of homeostasis.
Right, the classic baseline.
Exactly. Homeostasis is basically your body's tendency to resist change. It maintains these strict set points for things like your blood glucose levels, your body's pH, oxygen levels.
But modern science gave us an upgrade to that concept.
Yeah, in 2017, McEwen coined the term allostasis, which is the dynamic, active process of how your body actually adapts to maintain that stability.
A really helpful way to visualize the difference is thinking about your home's climate control.
Okay, I like this.
So homeostasis is the ideal 72 degrees you set on the thermostat.
Right.
Allostasis is the furnace and the air conditioning unit constantly kicking on and off, burning actual fuel, working overtime to keep the house at that exact temperature while a blizzard rages outside.
Wow.
Your autonomic nervous system, your metabolism, your immune system, they are the furnace.
And that furnace burns a lot of energy, especially during acute stress.
Oh, absolutely.
We all know the basics of the fight or flight response. You perceive a threat, your amygdala and hippocampus sound the alarm, and your sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear.
Heart rate spikes.
Blood pressure spikes, blood sugar increases for instant energy. But what is really crucial to understand is what gets turned off in that moment.
The parasympathetic nervous system.
Exactly. Which handles digestion, cellular repair, sexual activity. It's completely muted. Your body basically decides it doesn't have the metabolic budget to digest lunch when it needs to survive a predator.
What's fascinating here is that the very systems designed to protect us in acute situations paradoxically damage the body if they're left turned on.
Right, because they aren't meant to run indefinitely.
Exactly. Hanseli really pioneered this study. He developed the general adaptation syndrome.
The GAS.
Yeah. He pointed out that our bodies react similarly to both eustress, which is stress evoked by positive emotions or thrilling events, and distress, which is from negative threatening events.
So a roller coaster or a car crash?
The biological machinery is largely the same, and the core of that machinery is the HPA axis.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis?
Think of it like a biological relay race. You encounter a stressor, your hypothalamus hands a chemical baton to your pituitary gland,
Okay.
which then hands the baton to your adrenal glands, signaling them to flood your system with cortisol.
And in the short term, cortisol is a lifesaver. It mobilizes energy, reduces inflammation.
But if you are constantly handing off that baton, your system is exposed to continuous chronic cortisol. It becomes deeply destructive. It dysregulates your entire system.
Which brings us to a phrase that really stuck with me from the text, the bill comes due.
It always does.
The biological invoice for chronic stress is something called allostatic load, or AL. This is the cumulative wear and tear on your body and your brain.
Going back to the analogy, it's the physical degradation of the furnace from running nonstop for years.
And the medical consequences of a high allostatic load are severe, right? Particularly for the immune system.
Yeah, because cortisol is actually an immunosuppressant,
It literally reduces your lymphocytes.
primarily T lymphocytes,
Yeah.
and your natural killer cells. Your lymphatic cells actually have specific receptors for cortisol. So when you're chronically stressed, the hormone binds directly to your immune cells and just dials down their activity.
So the everyday stressors we face aren't just making us tired, they're actively disarming our immune defenses.
Right. Research shows that dealing with chronic marital conflict, taking difficult academic exams, or caring for a family member with dementia, it literally alters your immune parameters.
It can even elevate viral antibodies in your system, causing dormant viruses like Epstein-Barr or herpes simplex to reactivate.
Because the immune system just no longer has the resources to keep them in check.
We can see the real-world impact of this biological burden in a major 2018 longitudinal analysis by Chiu and Upchurch.
That was a fascinating study.
They looked at 1,932 midlife women between the ages of 42 and 52.
And they tracked 10 different biomarkers across cardiovascular, inflammatory, metabolic, and neuroendocrine systems.
Over 7 different time points to calculate their allostatic load scores. And the demographic predictors for a higher score are incredibly revealing.
We want to present this data impartially, just as the study found it. Higher scores were predicted by older age at baseline, lower household income, being of African American race, and speaking and reading English only.
We see a clear connection here to the broader epidemiological picture. Health disparities in lower socioeconomic groups and racial and ethnic minorities can be partly explained by the chronic stress those specific populations experience.
It is a measurable biological readout of structural and environmental strain.
Yeah.
And the data also reveals specific gender intersections.
Right.
For example, an elevated allostatic load is more often associated with depression in Black men and white women compared to their corresponding counterparts.
And to understand how that environmental strain and chronic stress actually trigger mental illness, we have to look at the diathesis stress model.
A diathesis is essentially a genetic or biological predisposition that increases your susceptibility to a disorder.
The text says your DNA loads the gun.
That's the phrase. The model explains that it takes a combination of that genetic vulnerability plus a severe stressor to actually pull the trigger and manifest the illness.
There is a highly illustrative clinical example of this. Imagine a woman who has a mother with a long history of severe depression.
So she has a genetic diathesis.
Yes. However, she lives a relatively stable life, doesn't experience any mental illness herself, but then she suffers a severe trauma. She is assaulted while leaving work.
A massive environmental stressor.
Exactly. Within 2 months of that traumatic event, she experiences her first manic episode. The genetic vulnerability was always there, but it required a profound stressor to activate it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have spent a lot of time on the pure biology, but the psychological side of the equation is equally critical.
Right. How we actually perceive the threat.
According to Lazarus and Folkman's transactional stress model, stress isn't just an external force that happens to you.
It's interactive.
Highly interactive. It's based entirely on whether you appraise an environment as threatening or benign.
Appraisal is the key word here. It is your individual evaluation of meaning. One situation might cause your heart to pound out of your chest, while the exact same situation registers as completely neutral to someone else sitting right next to you.
The model breaks this down into 2 distinct steps. First is primary appraisal. Your brain scans the situation and asks, is this event relevant to me? Does it threaten my values, my beliefs, or my personal commitments?
And if the answer is yes, you immediately move to secondary appraisal. That is where your brain asks, do I have the tools, the knowledge, and the coping mechanisms to survive or handle this threat?
Let's look at a clinical vignette to see how this plays out biologically.
The 2 students, right?
Yes, imagine 2 students facing the exact same exam. First, we have Susan. Susan genuinely values the content. She studied all semester and got a good night's sleep.
She wakes up nervous but alert.
Right. During her primary appraisal, she acknowledges the test is important and difficult. It matters to her.
But in her secondary appraisal, she assesses her tool belt. She knows she studied, she understands the material. She even knows she can retake the class if the absolute worst happens.
So she manages her stress, takes her seat, and completes the exam.
Then, in stark contrast, we have Joanne. Joanne doesn't care about the subject. She crammed for 2 days, pulled an all-nighter, and is physically exhausted.
She walks in expecting the test to be easy, assuming it'll be identical to past exams.
But when she looks at the paper, she realizes the questions are entirely new. In that exact moment, her primary appraisal registers a massive catastrophic threat. If she fails, she loses her scholarship and she's out of school.
And her secondary appraisal immediately fails. She realizes she has zero tools or knowledge to pass this new test.
Because she cannot cope, her biological alarm sounds. She begins hyperventilating, she starts tremoring, she yells obscenities at the teacher, and she storms out of the room in a total panic.
It is the exact same room, the exact same piece of paper on the desk.
But Joanne's brain interpreted it as a life-or-death predator based purely on her appraisal.
This raises an important question. What exactly shapes our default appraisal settings?
Personality has to be a huge factor.
A massive factor. Innate personality. Our personalities fundamentally dictate our biological reality by shaping how frequently we trigger our own stress responses.
We all know the classic Type A personality. Competitive, aggressive, ambitious, impatient, time urgent.
They speak at an accelerated pace.
Yeah. But what we often miss is that this behavior trait keeps their psychophysiological arousal hovering near the red line all day. Their sympathetic nervous system is constantly engaged over minor delays.
And type B is the inverse. Relaxed, easygoing, easily satisfied. They engage in more preventative care. They are far less likely to smoke or drink heavily to manage their mood.
We also have to look at Type C and Type D, which carry really unique health implications.
Right, a type C personality is compliant, eager to please, and heavily avoids conflict.
Crucially, they have immense difficulty expressing emotion. They tend to suppress it. Historically, this personality type was studied for its associations with cancer, particularly breast cancer.
The theory being that chronic emotional suppression alters endocrine and immune function over long periods.
Finally, we have Type D, which stands for distressed. This personality leans heavily toward negative emotions, chronic pessimism, and social inhibition.
They don't share their emotions or seek comfort from others.
And emerging data links the Type D personality to severe adverse outcomes in acute coronary syndrome and diabetes. If you are a Type A or a Type D, your internal furnace is running at maximum capacity far more often than a Type B.
But our internal biology and our personality don't operate in a vacuum. The people around us act as a critical buffer.
Social networks.
Yes. Research breaks our social networks down into 3 distinct physical structures. Level I is your inner circle, about 6 to 12 people you have close, intimate contact with.
Level 2 is a larger group, roughly 30 to 40 people you see regularly, like coworkers or extended family.
And level 3 is your broad network of hundreds of direct contacts. Your grocer, mail carrier, casual acquaintances.
Having a dense, highly interconnected network is the absolute best defense in a crisis.
Because if the people in your level I and level 2 networks know each other, they can coordinate a response.
Think of a small town where everyone knows everyone. They can rally around a family whose house burns down much faster than neighbors in a massive, disconnected urban apartment building who have never even spoken to one another.
That network provides 3 vital forms of support to lower your allostatic load. Emotional support, which provides attachment and a sense of belonging.
Tangible support, which is direct, physical aid. Loaning money, cooking meals, doing chores for someone who is sick.
And informational support, which is providing advice, giving feedback, helping someone navigate a complex problem.
We do need to mention the highly controversial role of social media within modern networks.
The evidence is deeply divided there.
It really is. For some populations, heavy social media usage is directly correlated with increased stress, depression, and loneliness. It acts as a constant source of negative social comparison.
But for others, complete abstinence from social media actually decreases life satisfaction because it severs a vital informational and emotional lifeline.
Particularly for marginalized groups who might not have a dense local level I network, it is a massive double-edged sword for your allostatic load.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the actual life events that force us to rely on those networks in the first place.
Any disruption to our routine, whether it is tragic or joyful, requires biological energy to process.
Exactly.
This brings us back to the question I asked you at the very beginning of this deep dive. Back in 1967, 2 researchers named Holmes and Rahi created the recent Life Changes questionnaire.
They assigned life change units, or LCUs, to different life events.
Based on how much adaptive energy they require from the body, I am going to rattle off some of these numbers because they are genuinely surprising.
Go for it.
The death of a spouse is rated at 105 LCUs. Being fired from work is 64. But here's the twist. An outstanding personal achievement is 33 LCUs.
Wow.
Taking a vacation is 29 LCUs. Compare that to a minor violation of the law, like getting a traffic ticket, which is 32.
So a relaxing vacation and a minor run-in with the law require almost the exact same amount of adaptive energy from your body.
Exactly. Even joyous, positive changes disrupt homeostasis. A new marriage, a promotion, packing your bags for a trip, they all force your autonomic nervous system and your metabolism to adapt.
And your body has to spend massive amounts of energy to process the excitement, the change in sleep schedule, the disruption of daily routine.
And if you accumulate over 400 LCUs in a single year, your body is effectively in a major life crisis, regardless of whether those points came from positive or negative events.
There is also a fascinating gender difference in how we process these life changes. While males typically lean toward the classic fight-or-flight response when faced with mounting LCUs.
Females often display what is called a tend and befriend response.
Right. Instead of aggressive adaptation strategies, they're biologically and socially driven to seek out social support and protect offspring during times of intense change.
So what does this all mean? We have all this stress, all this biological wear and tear, and a constant accumulation of life change units. How do we actually survive it?
That brings us to coping and adaptation. Coping isn't just venting. It is a deliberate, planned, psychological effort to manage stressful demands.
And there are two main categories of coping. First is problem-focused coping, where you attack the source of the stress directly.
Like a student trying to study and the TV in the next room is too noisy.
Their primary appraisal registers stress. They use problem-focused coping by walking into the room and turning off the TV. The source of the stress is eliminated.
The second category is emotion-focused coping. We use this when we cannot easily fix or control the external problem, so we reinterpret the situation to change its internal meaning.
There's a brilliant clinical vignette from the text to illustrate this. A husband adamantly refuses to visit his wife's relatives.
Because they have dogs in the house?
Right. He hates the mess. It violates his need for order. Visiting them becomes a massive source of marital conflict. He copes initially by just refusing to go. Pure avoidance.
But then, one holiday, someone gives him a puppy.
And he falls completely in love with his own dog. Suddenly, he changes the internal meaning of what it means to have dogs in a house. He views his wife's relatives entirely differently and now gladly visits them.
The external situation, the relatives having dogs, never changed.
Not at all.
But his emotional appraisal of the situation completely transformed, eliminating the stress response.
But of course, not all coping is good coping. We have to draw a hard line between healthy and unhealthy strategies.
People often turn to coping mechanisms that temporarily soothe their emotional anxiety, but vastly increase their allostatic load over time.
Relying on alcohol, smoking tobacco, chronic overeating, they might dampen the immediate emotional distress of a hard day, but they are physically destroying the body's metabolic and regulatory systems.
Healthy coping involves things like regular aerobic exercise, which actively metabolizes circulating stress hormones.
And getting adequate sleep, which allows the parasympathetic nervous system to turn back on and repair the cellular damage from the day.
In clinical settings, nurses and medical professionals focus heavily on interventions to manage severe stress and guide patients toward that healthy coping.
When someone is in the middle of a profound crisis, sometimes the most effective interventions are remarkably simple.
Absolutely. Helping a patient reinstate a basic, predictable daily routine, like shaving their face at the same time every morning or combing their hair.
It can miraculously improve their outlook. It gives them an anchor of control in an otherwise chaotic environment, signaling to the brain that they are safe enough to perform basic grooming, which helps dial back the sympathetic nervous system.
Modern medicine is also adapting to help people cope on a wider scale. Telehealth and web-based stress management programs are proving highly effective.
Especially for populations that might avoid traditional clinics due to stigma or logistical barriers.
There are highly successful web programs designed specifically for overwhelmed college students and specialized telehealth interventions for military personnel experiencing PTSD.
It is all about meeting people where they are with the informational support they need to process their stress.
And the ultimate goal of all these interventions, whether it's a grooming routine, exercising, or a telehealth session, is to facilitate adaptation,
which is defined clinically as a person's capacity to survive and flourish across three specific areas: their physical health, their psychological well-being, and their social functioning.
When coping succeeds, all three of those areas stabilize, and the allostatic load drops.
Let's summarize the journey we've been on today. We've learned that stress is absolutely not just a fleeting emotion. It is a profound, whole-body biopsychosocial event.
We explored the cumulative wear and tear of your allostatic load.
And how chronic cortisol exposure acts as a biological wrecking ball, literally suppressing your immune system and disarming your white blood cells. We've seen how your unique personality type fundamentally shapes how your brain appraises a threat, deciding in a fraction of a second whether to sound the alarm.
And we learned the life-saving power of having a dense, interconnected, levelized social network to buffer against the inevitable storms of life.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on everything we've discussed today. We learned from the Holmes and Rahe scale that positive events, things like outstanding personal achievements, pregnancies, new marriages, relaxing vacations, cost the body immense adaptive energy.
They add significantly to your life change units.
So this leaves us with a provocative question. In our modern society, where you are constantly told by culture and social media to have it all, chasing endless personal achievements, packing your schedule with exotic vacations, and expanding your social networks to the absolute maximum limit, could our very pursuit of the perfect life be covertly driving up our allostatic load?
That's a powerful question. When you look at the cumulative effect of constant adaptation on the HPA axis, it forces you to question the metabolic cost of a perpetually optimized life.
Could it be that by trying to maximize every aspect of our existence, we are turning our very definition of success into a biological health hazard?
It's definitely something we all need to evaluate for ourselves.
It certainly is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a completely new lens through which to view your own body and mind. Keep questioning the world around you, and take care of your homeostasis.